This is Amy Jenner. Thanks for your company. And joining me now is Time Magazine's congressional correspondent Jay Newton-Small, who's here for a US Studies Centre forum, the Public Knowledge Forum, hosted by Sydney University's US Studies Centre. Thanks for being there, Jay. I want to ask you about this ongoing crisis between Congress and President Obama. In his weekly radio address, he says that Washington has got to stop the cycle of manufactured crises. Is there any prospect of that?
Well, right now, Kieran, there doesn't seem to be any prospect of these manufactured crises ending. So far, right now, you've got the Senate, which looks to most probably be shut down next week as they go nuclear, as the so-called nuclear option over judges, because the Republicans keep blocking the president's nominee to the D.C. Circuit Court, which is a federal bench. And so that the Senate could essentially shut down over that in the coming weeks. And then right after that, December 13th is the next budget debate. Or the budget deadline, and you could look at another government shutdown as early as January. So these things just keep coming and coming and coming, and there really isn't, they really haven't gotten any kind of agreement or any kind of compromise that seems to be able to stop and this sort of dysfunction that's happening.
Yeah, well, it's only a couple of weeks ago that the US scraped through that last budget and debt ceiling row, but it was only a stopgap measure. And as you say, mid-January is when the next budget deadline is looming. So when people use the term they've kicked the can down the road, it's not very far down the road.
No, indeed, January, and then right after that, mid-February, we've got the debt ceiling again. So, I mean, you keep having these things over and over and over again where they're holding, they're going to have to come to some sort of agreement, and they just can't, they don't seem capable of having a long-term agreement because that would require a really big package, and Democrats refuse to do it without any kind of new tax revenues, and Republicans just will not sign on to new tax revenues. This has been the sticking point for years, I mean, literally for the last 3 years, and they just cannot get over it, and they seem sort of paralyzed to keep doing this over and over and over again every few months, and it's really damaging to not only the U.S. economy but to the U.S. reputation around the world.
Jay, is it simply the tail wagging the dog with the Tea Party really wielding a fair bit of clout over the Republican Party?
To some degree, yes. I mean, it is the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party who's refusing to accept any revenues. There are moderate Republicans who would accept new revenues. In fact, who proposed bringing in new revenues in the last time we shut the government down. But it's really, the Tea Party felt empowered by the government shutdown last time around. Many of them said, great, let's do it again. And there really isn't an incentive for them to compromise because they're much more afraid of getting primaried or getting attacked from their sort of extreme flank than they are to make a compromise. If they compromise, they're much more vulnerable to losing office. And so really we're trapped in a system in the U.S. because our districts are so gerrymandered and because our, the primary system is so closed that we're rewarding extremism rather than compromise, and that's going to keep going until we fix the system fundamentally.
And in that context, the midterms are looming next year. Who is going to cop the political flack from all of this?
And that's a great question because right now there are not a lot of Republican seats that are at risk because these districts are so closed and so gerrymandered. There's only about, I think, 30 seats total in play, and out of them, you need 17 in order to switch the control of Congress. That said, if you really overreach and it becomes, the point where the American people are just so disgusted and it becomes a wave election where they're sort of like throw everybody out, then there is a risk that Republicans could lose the House, and that is really, I think, what certainly Nancy Pelosi, the House Democratic leader, is looking for here and hoping that, yeah, go ahead, shut the government down again in January and let's see what happens, come November in the elections.
And on the Obamacare, which has really sparked so much of the anger in the conservative side of politics in the US, the irony is if there wasn't so much focus on the debt ceiling and the budget row that, well, this has been botched really, hasn't it, the implementation of Obamacare in the early stages?
I mean, absolutely. The Republicans, to some degree, kind of hung themselves on this because the whole debate would have been very much just about how badly handled Obamacare implementation was. And instead, it's become this sort of two-pronged, like, well, Obamacare is really bad, but Republicans are really bad, too, because they're divided and they're shutting down the government. So, they kind of, both parties are really hanging themselves on this. And I think Obama would certainly pay a much steeper political price if it weren't for the fact that the Republican sort of war with itself, the own civil war, is taking up so much press, and so much of our time and attention.
Time Magazine's congressional correspondent Jay Newton-Small. Thanks for your time. Enjoy your stay in Australia. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Kieran, for having me on.